How much compression, equalization, and saturation you should add to a mix or a master is completely up to you. However, it helps to know when a certain processing type becomes audible. Whether you're new to music production or you've been doing it for a while, it's crucial to keep your listener's threshold for change in mind. With that said, let's cover how much is too much, knowing when processing becomes audible. Starting with the most universal concept, let's cover when changes in dB can be detected. A very skilled listener can tell when something has been turned down by about 1 dB. Now, some engineers report that they can hear even smaller changes, but for your casual listener, a change of 3 dB is typically the threshold. Now, when I say a change in 3 dB, I'm talking about with isolated signals. For example, if I have a stereo mix and I lower it by 3 dB, this is the threshold for your everyday music listener. However, we seem to be more sensitive to relative levels. For example, if I have an acoustic guitar and a vocal, even a casual listener will be able to hear a 2 dB drop in either the vocal or the acoustic. If one signal remains the same level and the other changes, it's easier to notice the change. Now, this explains one of the biggest challenges in mixes. If the vocal has multiple takes and one is, say, 2 dB higher in amplitude than the other, even a casual listener will notice, let alone an experienced engineer. Now, all this to say, be sure to keep gain staging in mind and try to capture consistent performances. If you have multiple takes, automations of effects, or maybe different tracks for different effects, do your best to ensure that the level is consistent between each stage of processing. This makes controlling the relative amplitude between multiple signals much easier. So let's take a listen to a stereo mix. I'll alter the amplitude by 3 dB, then 2 dB, and then 1 dB. Let me know in the comments if you think the volume has been increased or decreased for each change. Next up, let's discuss changes with EQ filters. So unlike simple amplitude changes, there's a lot more to consider when determining the audible threshold for EQ filters. The amplitude, the center frequency, and the Q value all play a role in whether a change can be detected. For example, if I boost 20 kHz by 1 dB, it's a lot less audible than if I boost 1 kHz by 1 dB. We're also more sensitive to amplification than attenuation. For example, attenuating 1 kHz by 1 dB is less noticeable than amplifying 1 kHz by 1 dB. That is if we're using identical Q values. Now, although it's a difficult thing to determine, and it depends on the context, I'd recommend making no changes greater than 3 dB when you're mixing and 1.5 dB when you're mastering. That is if your goal is to retain a natural sound. And also, that's excluding high-pass and low-pass filters, which of course make much greater changes than this. If you're not concerned with a natural sound, or you're making more creative changes, then it's genuinely whatever works in that context. Also, the more narrow the filter, the less natural the sound. For example, if I amplify 2 kHz with a 1 octave bandwidth by 3 dB, it'll sound more natural than if I was using a 1/3 octave filter. In an A-B comparison, it might be easier to hear the 1 octave change since we're amplifying the overall signal by a greater amount. However, if the filter is applied for the entire track, the 1/3 octave filter sticks out more. The same could be said for attenuation. A sharper filter may be harder to hear when you're switching between on and off, but it'll sound unnatural when it's compared to a change to a larger bandwidth. So to show this, let's listen to a mix with 1 octave filters and a mix with 1/3 octave filters. Although the filters are more precise, notice how the 1/3 octave filters are more audible when there's no on-off cycle. Real quick, Sage Audio is an analog mastering service. We've been around for 20 years, and mastering starts at $49 a track. There's a link below if you're interested, and a longer ad at the end of the video. Next up, let's cover how much compression before it becomes audible. So like EQ, this depends on a lot of factors. The general rule for an individual instrument is no more than 6 dB of compression, for an instrument bus no more than 3 dB, and for a stereo mix no more than 1.5 dB. However, different genres have different listener expectations. But before we get into that, let's discuss what makes compression audible. Now, RMS compression, which detects and processes the average loudness of the signal, is the least audible. Peaks will get through, but it allows for general dynamic control that's harder to notice. Peak compression is much more audible due to its accuracy and its impact on transients. Now, generally speaking, a longer attack and a moderate release will result in the least audible compression. An attack longer than 40 milliseconds will let the transient through without altering its timbre too aggressively, and a release around 100 to 200 milliseconds will avoid distortion without greatly impacting the ADSR of any peaks after the initial peak that triggered the compression. Also, peak compression has a good deal of interplay between distortion and changing the ADSR. For example, a 20 millisecond attack will cause a good deal of distortion. The same could be said for a 40 millisecond release. However, the slight delay of the attack and the quick behavior of the release retain the original dynamics more than most settings. Alternatively, if I was to use look ahead, a longer release, and a soft knee to gradually compress, I've greatly reduced the amount of distortion. However, the accuracy of the detection means the transients are completely altered. The gradual compression changes the ADSR of lower amplitude aspects of the signal, and the longer release impacts potentially unrelated signals that occur after the initial crossing of the threshold. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the amount of compression that can occur before it's noticed by the listener varies greatly between genres and the listeners of that genre. If I compress a guitar by 6 dB in a rock track, that's not too aggressive of a change. If I compress a saxophone by 6 dB in a jazz track, that probably won't go over well with the listeners. So ultimately, it comes down to how much distortion can be tolerated in the genre, how greatly ADSR changes can be tolerated, and if the genre's listeners expect or don't expect a compressed sound. So let's listen to two compressor settings. The first will minimize distortion, but alter the ADSR. The second will retain the ADSR, but result in more distortion. Last up, let's cover when saturation or distortion becomes audible. Now, this is definitely the most difficult one to figure out. Unlike faders, EQs, or compressors, most saturation plugins don't show the amount of processing being applied. Additionally, some saturation plugins introduce changes to the frequency response outside of harmonics. For example, each algorithm or mode of Saturn II introduces a unique frequency response. But if we really want to assign a value to distortion, we can measure the THD. This is the percentage of harmonics as it relates to the original signal. Now, the one plugin I know of that offers this is Softube's Harmonics plugin, but honestly, I found this to be super inaccurate. Now, alternatively, we could do a null test and find the ratio of the original to the saturated signal while trying to compensate for any EQ changes the plugin introduces. But the best plugin I've found to test this is with Logic Stock Exciter, which lets me introduce either second or third order harmonics with color 1 or color 2 respectively, and then set a THD percentage. Using separate tracks, I could gain match a heavily distorted sine wave and the original sine wave. Interestingly, the differences are really minor once the gain is matched. Additionally, odd order harmonics seem to change the timbre more than even order harmonics. Despite the third order harmonic being lower in amplitude, once gain matched to the original signal, the timbre is definitely different. Now, my guess is that since the even order harmonic is a perfect octave, it's easier to group the harmonic with the original signal. Meanwhile, the third order harmonic is a different note from the original, making it stand out. So for saturation or distortion, you'll need to use your ears. Additionally, even order harmonics will blend more seamlessly in with the original signal than odd harmonics. Let's take a listen to these three signals and let me know if either the even or odd harmonics stand out more. Get professional analog mastering that accurately translates what you hear in your head. Seriously though, when people work with us, they get results. That's why major industry professionals like Keith Urban's producer Aaron Schurz works with us, Grammy award-winning AJ Castillo, Billboard #1 charted artist Megan Lindsay, Grammy award-winning artist Tulis, The Voice singer Cody Ballou, Grammy-nominated producer Tyler Kane, Warner Music artist Ricky Young, and the list goes on. Why waste your time creating masters that don't accurately translate what you hear in your head when you could instantly fix a problem by clicking the link in the description and working directly with professionals who have already done what you're trying to do? We've mastered thousands of songs that accurately translate what each client hears in their head, and it'll work for you too. Click the link in the description now and get direct access to us for personalized analog mastering that accurately translates what you hear in your head.